Hello and welcome back to another video about filmmaking, photography and the creative work behind. I am really sorry it took me some time to shoot a new video for you guys because, as you can see, I'm still sitting in my bedroom recording this video because my office is still under construction, and actually I'm not feeling really good recording videos here in my bedroom. I really like the vibe of my office, so hopefully going back to my office during the next days. But the good side of all this, I got some projects done, and yes, one of them is the car commercial I already announced in the previous video, I think. And this project is the most complex and biggest videos I did so far. So I really wanted to do big behind the scenes videos for you, where I talk all about all the pre-planning we did, all the equipment we used, how we took the shots, and also jump in the post-production process in Premiere Pro. So if you're interested in something like this, stay tuned, maybe consider to subscribe to this channel and stay tuned for this one. But in this video I want to talk about something different, which a lot of people asked me already about, and this is my photography settings for the Fujifilm X-T4. At first I want to talk about the menu settings in the camera, and then we talk about the holy trinity like ISO, shutter speed and aperture. A short disclaimer before we jump into the settings. These settings, I want to tell you, are just my personal preference, and I do a lot of portrait stuff and some landscape and real estate here and there. So I think my settings have a strong focus on portrait shootings. So my tip for you is to get to know your camera, get to know how the settings like ISO, aperture and shutter speed does affect each other and does work together the best, and fine tweak these settings to your personal preference. So let's jump into the menu settings. First setting is the image quality, where I choose RAW for the most of the time to get the most dynamic range for the editing process, but sometimes I go with fine and raw when I need some ready to post pictures with some of the Fujifilm's recipes I mentioned in my other video. You can check this out in the upper right corner right now when you're interested in some nice Fujifilm JPEG colors. For raw recording I choose uncompressed because my SD cards are big enough to shoot a lot of pictures even when they're bigger size. The rest of the image quality settings like film simulations, grain and so on are just important for shooting in JPEGs, so we just skip these for now. For the white balance I choose auto because the camera does a really good job with the auto white balance, and even when the camera messed up, you can change it in post when shooting raw. With that being said, we can jump over to the focus settings. When I have a lazy day and I'm not shooting with an all manual lens like my Canon FD vintage lens, which I use for these photos you see right now, I go with the autofocus and the face eye detection turned on. I know some people have a huge problem with the Fujifilm autofocus, especially when you compare it to the AF from Sony or Canon, but for my opinion, for portrait stuff, it's totally good enough and doing a pretty good job. When I use an all manual focus lens or I have rough lighting conditions, I go over to the manual focus settings, and for a little more support, I turn on the manual focus assist with focus peaking to red and high to nail the focus all the time. And that's it already for my menu settings in the camera. And now let's talk about the holy trinity of ISO, shutter speed and aperture. Starting with the ISO, I try to keep my ISO as low as possible to get the cleanest image out of the camera I can get. Besides that, I actually like to have some grain in my portrait photos, but to have the most control over my image, I keep the ISO as low as possible and add the grain in the post-production process in Lightroom. For my shutter speed, I try to go not lower as 1/125th of a second, because I want to avoid the blur of my shaky hands maybe. And I think the Fujifilm X-T4 can handle already also lower shutter speeds like 1/60th of a second, but just to make sure, over 125th of a second is perfect for me. Anyway, most of the time, especially when you're taking photos in direct sunlight, you have to crank up the ISO, and often I see my photos around 1/2000th of a second or even 1/4000th of a second. Talking about the aperture, it really depends on the lens you're using and what kind of photography you're doing. So for example, when I do portrait stuff, I try to keep my aperture as low as possible. So for example, f1.8 or f2 to get some blur and some separation between my subject and the background. When shooting landscape or real estate stuff, I bump up my aperture around 4 or 5 or even higher to get everything perfect in focus. So just a quick tip for absolute beginners: just get to know your camera, know how cameras work in general, and you get some really nice professional looking photography stuff. Thank you for stopping by and checking out my channel. Maybe consider to subscribe, especially when you're interested in the big car commercial coming in the next days and the huge behind the scenes video coming in the next week. And last but not least, I want to say thank you to every new subscriber who is here on this channel, who likes my stuff. Hopefully see you in the next one. Bye und auf Wiedersehen.